Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. Today we're going to be talking about Google Ads, because most health practices use Google Ads and are paying for them, creating traffic that never calls. My guest today is John Saunders. He has spent 16 years solving that exact problem. He is the founder of a company called RevKey, a digital ad agency that helps functional medicine clinics and chiropractic practices grow through paid research built around one metric: creating new patient conversations. He's direct, a little blunt, and genuinely not interested in metrics that don't move your business and practice forward. Today he's here to talk about what actually works when you want to fill your schedule with new patients and not just put numbers on your Google dashboard. Welcome to Season 3 of For the Love of Chiropractic. Season 1 has 60 episodes of practice management tips to help you build the best practice possible. Season 2, 3 keys of my success, 50 interviews with the most successful chiropractors from around the world. Season 3, resources for your success. So let's listen up and learn how to build a great business. I had the opportunity to catch up with John Saunders by phone. John, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Robert.
It's so good to be chatting with you, and I know how busy your schedule is, and in fact, it's taken us several weeks just to set up this interview, so I really appreciate you taking and making the time. So I really want to just roll up our sleeves and dig right in, talking about Google Ads, and let's really start with the first thing that's on my mind, which is, why do Google Ads get clicks, but then the phone's not ringing?
So usually when we're talking about, a couple of different steps in there, right? Somebody searches something, say, chiropractor near me, being our most basic search. They see your ad up towards the top, ahead of all of those organic results, ahead of the map placements. Usually the first 3 things you're going to see are Google Ads. Somebody clicks on your website and gets there, and if you're getting nothing off of that, there's definitely a website component that comes into play. As somebody who manages Google Ads, in a lot of cases, we can do a lot of things right on the Google Ads side of things. But if the website is not communicating something correctly, or is just not good, or it's unclear on what action you want somebody to take. Do you want them to call? Do you want them to hit a schedule now and schedule something? So usually if we're getting a bunch of clicks, but we're not getting anything, we want to look at the website, and then we also want to take a look. The second thing is what's going on in Google Ads. Are we getting some clicks from people who are too far away? Are we getting clicks from people who aren't going to be able to afford the service for some reason? And so it can be a couple of different things, but in a lot of cases we find is that it's something on the website that's unclear for clients.
So what you just started to touch on is sometimes called the new client or the new patient funnel. So can you talk a little bit about that funnel, of how it goes from the Google Ads to the person actually in your office, and you providing them with great chiropractic care?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually, and there are a number of different types of Google Ads, but the most basic one that we're going to talk about is the search campaign, or somebody types something into the Google search bar, and one of those ads comes up. And then once they click on that, they end up on your website, and then we kind of enter that area of they do the scheduling or they call you, and then making sure that all of your back-end processes are in really good shape to convert those leads to being people who are coming in to see you and becoming paying clients. And so you always want to make sure that back end piece is in really good shape before you start Google Ads. There's nothing more frustrating for somebody like me to be able to drive a bunch of leads to a practice and then hear, well, we got 20 leads, but we didn't convert any of them. And then the question becomes, why didn't you convert those 20 leads? And, at least, 50% of those into being paying clients.
Sure. So actually, that brings up two questions that I have. Number one, what is a good conversion rate from Google Ads, for chiropractors, would you say?
Overall on Google, the average conversion rate is 2 to 3%. Pretty much any time we're talking about somebody in the health and wellness space, I usually want to see something at least 5% is kind of the minimum I'm looking for. And there's certainly things where you can get much higher than that. Like if you're doing something that's fairly specialized, like spinal decompression, there's not a lot of people who have that equipment. So you're going to have probably a higher conversion rate on something like that than just general chiropractor searches, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense, and I appreciate that. So you said a couple times talking about the most basic search, someone searches for chiropractor near me, which alludes to more advanced than other searches. Can you begin to explore that a little bit? Because I frankly, I don't know what those other things would be, and I'm very curious.
So, and I think specifically with chiropractors, much like I would also compare it to dentistry in many ways,
Sure.
Most of the searches are going to be kind of in that area. As opposed to, if you were talking about medical, like knee surgery is going to be different from primary care doctors and something like that.
Right.
And then there will also be people who, I brought up spinal decompression, who type in more of symptoms than anything else. And those are usually a little towards the top of that sales funnel. We usually want to make sure that before we get to the top of the sales funnel, like we want to, if somebody says chiropractor in X, Y, and Z city, like we want to make sure that we're there for that search if that's the city that we're in. And then maybe starting to get into some of the back pain or arm pain, shoulder pain, and some of the various types of searches that we can have there. But it's usually going to be something. Chiropractor is usually going to be in that search. If that's something we're looking for, usually is going to be the thing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So one of the things that you and I had touched on before we started recording was, in the world of healthcare, there are cash pay patients and then there are insurance-based patients, and they can be a different type of person. So can you talk a little bit about each of those and how to market to those people?
Sure. And specifically in the case of people who are doing cash pay, Google Ads has a really great advantage in that we can segment our ads to only show to certain household incomes. I brought up, once again, spinal decompression is probably a pretty good example here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where that's going to be a fairly expensive service. And so you're going to want to make sure that you advertise that to maybe the top 40% of household incomes, which is about $100,000 and up, to make sure that they're going to be able to afford that service. Because otherwise, we don't want to get a bunch of clicks from the lower 50% of household incomes who aren't going to be able to afford that service. And then on the insurance side, we can kind of leave that household income piece relatively open, just because if we're talking about general chiropractor care where they're going to be paying a deductible to their insurance or something like that. But specifically for private pay clients, that household income piece becomes a really big part of what we do.
Sure, that makes sense. One of the things that you and I had discussed the very first time that you and I were chatting was identifying who is your ideal client, and then that's where you begin the conversation. So if you can talk some about that also.
Yeah, and there's definitely some demographic pieces that we can do within Google, and I think the household income piece is usually one of the biggest ones. There are a couple of other types of Google campaigns that can show up on like YouTube or on websites where we might use a little more demographics data in terms of, which turns it into a little more like a social media ad where we're describing more about, people that we're specifically looking for specific services. So there's definitely a lot of different products within Google that we could use for different things.
Fascinating. So I want to pivot a little bit because obviously what you do is very specialized, and I'm certainly not embarrassed to say, obviously you're not the only person out there doing this. So how can you tell if your ad agency is growing you or just billing you? Like what are the metrics that you hold yourself to and you tell your clients this is what you should be looking at?
Yeah, one of the most important things I think that you can ask of your ad agency is whether you can actually see the data within Google Ads, or is it being funneled through some sort of dashboard and you don't actually have access to the back end. And I see a lot of marketing agencies do that. And sometimes that's a way for them to be dishonest, because they can say, oh, you got all of these quote unquote conversions, but what is that actually? Is that somebody actually filling out the form, or is that just somebody spending 30 seconds on your website and they're counting that as a conversion? So I think that's one of the main things that you want to be looking at. And I think that you'll also especially with the number of phone calls, like you'll get a sense of, are you busier than you were before, is ultimately what we're looking for. And so we will definitely talk to clients. They'll be like, yes, I can tell that we're busier, we're getting more inquiries, and just really kind of holding your marketing partner accountable. And if you're they're saying that they're seeing a bunch of conversions on their side, but they're not filtering through to you, figuring out why that's ultimately happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, what do most doctors get wrong when they go to approach Google Ads?
I think a misconception of what it is, and then also how much it's going to cost, and you want to figure out how much is that click going to cost in your area, and that can be very different in Google. If you're a chiropractor in Little Rock, Arkansas, you're going to pay a lot less per click than somebody who is a chiropractor in New York City. And making sure that you have enough marketing budget to support a marketing campaign, so you can get 100, 200, 300 clicks in a month, to be able to get those potential clients on your website, and then ultimately doing that conversion action of filling out the form or calling you ultimately. And then I'd say the other piece is there's definitely a time aspect to it. Yes, we can turn on Google Ads and you can all of a sudden be appearing on the first page, but it takes Google a while to learn about your business, your area, who your competitors are. And so those Google Ads will improve over time as the Google AI algorithms kind of figure out what your business is specifically looking for.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. So a moment ago, you threw some numbers out about clicks per month. What for a chiropractor who's in practice, in one office, maybe it's one or two docs, in the office, how many clicks per month should they be looking for?
Yeah, and I think that also depends on number of openings. So yeah, if you're, if it's just you and you have a certain amount of openings, let's figure out what you need, how many clicks that you might need to get to fill those spaces. But then, if you're running, 5 different clinics, and at each clinic you have, anywhere between 5 to 10 people, then it's figuring out based on how many openings. That's really kind of what we should be looking for. In terms of like a bare minimum, I would say like the least that you're going to be looking for is like 100 clicks. And so if we take, that 100 clicks and say that, we get, 8 of those people to become conversions. And then, if of those 8 people, 4 end up becoming patients, then, you spent money to get 4 patients, which in terms of Google Ads, that's going to be a fairly good return.
Sure.
And that's where we start asking questions like, what type of patient is this? Is this somebody who's going to come in every 6 months to just get a rib adjusted? Or is this somebody who's going to come in consistently? And really trying to figure out like what those clients look like.
So that's going back to who is your ideal client, who are you looking for, and who are you looking to serve?
Right. Yeah. And that also comes through on, not only what keywords we use, but also what is the text in the ad that we have out there. And then also continuing that message into the website and, what is your website communicating to people in terms of like what type of clients you're looking for.
That's really interesting. So, when I understand, obviously it's a certain number of clicks, will turn into a certain number of treating patients, people who are using the specific office. So tell me a little bit about budgeting for Google Ads as it relates to the practice.
And so it's kind of doing the math backwards is where we say, okay, we've got X amount of openings. And then, if we figure that 5% of clicks, and so I actually usually do this in a return on investment calculator where we talk about, if you spend $1,000 in a month and each click cost you $500, you're going to get, or $5, you're going to get 200 clicks. And then, approximating how many clients you'll actually get out of those 200 clicks. And then, if that's not enough appointments and not enough clients for you, you can spend more, or if that's too many, then, maybe dropping your budget down from there.
Sure. Well, and from the chiropractic side, we have a statistic that we call case visit average. And yes, you have some patients who come in one time, and you have other patients who, over the course of their lifetime come in 100 or 200 times, whatever the number is. But it all averages out somewhere in the middle. So you can look at your case visit average and say, okay, well, on average, the typical average person spends X number of dollars. Maybe it's $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 with the office. And you talk about doing the math backwards. So then divide that into, okay, so how much did we spend with the Google Ads to acquire that person?
Right. And generally, in terms of like a ratio, when we consider, kind of that average revenue by customer is, we want at least for every dollar you're spending on ads for you to be getting $5 in revenue from that client over time. That's really kind of the bare minimum. And, for more specialized services, and especially if you're doing private pay, that might be more like 8 to 1, or maybe even as high as 15 to 1 or higher.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, when you talk about, Google, and they have their algorithms, and it takes a while for Google to figure out who you are, who your practice is, who are you looking to try and attract to your practice. Is it fair to say that Google is on our side?
In a way, yes. It is usually, I would say that Google's second priority is to make sure you get clients. However, Google's primary number one goal as a business is always going to be to maximize their revenue and their profits. So there definitely can be cases where, if we take a lot of the automated settings that Google will tell you that will be good for you, it's Google selling ad inventory that might not be as advantageous for you. And that's where, marketing nerds like myself come in to be able to go into the back end and go, oh, that's not where we don't really want to be showing these ads on, other websites. Like with display advertising, we want to make sure that, as much of this is shown on search as we can, or, increasingly, something that they talked about last month, we're going to start seeing more ads actually show up in those AI overviews in Google, and then also if you're using Google Gemini. So all of that is coming as well. And so, yes, they would like you, for the most part, to be successful, for you to continue to being a client. But also, they will occasionally put your ads in places that we maybe don't want to see them.
So let me ask a sort of a sidebar question before we dig into that a little bit more deeply. So on average, I know you've done this for a long time now, how often does Google change and tweak their algorithms that sort of send the average customer, us, the chiropractor, into like, oh my God, now what did they do?
So it used to be, I would say that Google Ads was very stable. My friends who work on the search engine optimization and the organic side of things were constantly dealing with these Google updates. But Google Ads would change how their ads appear and things like that. But really, in the last 18 months, Google Ads has changed greatly. There are strategies that we started using maybe at the start of 2025 that we had to throw away just because they stopped working at the start of the year. So things on Google are changing rapidly, especially with this new focus on, their focus on all of the AI search coming out of Gemini, and so the market for that is changing rapidly.
Wow. So as a doc in practice, the only way that I would know that is because I would suddenly see like it plummeted. It's not working at all anymore. So then we go, well, now what?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you'll even go in and it won't even be like a really obvious change, like the algorithm in terms of just might not be counting your conversions correctly all of a sudden. Or it can be as simple as something as somebody moved something off of your website, and then so all of a sudden none of your conversion tracking is working anymore. So Google doesn't know what type of clients it should be sending you. So. And it's the thing I do fear about Google is that over time they're making this product more and more and more complicated, and so it's harder and harder for a regular business owner who is seeing patients during the day to pick this up at night and try to be able to figure out what Google Ads, which is what people like me are for.
No, exactly. So, which brings me frankly to my final question, because sadly time has run away from us. So. Who is your ideal client, and how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. My ideal client tends to be groups where you are in growth mode and you've got traffic coming in from social media or organically, but you have more openings. Maybe you've hired some additional doctors. Maybe you've started at a new location where you don't have any patients coming into. And I think that that's really kind of the ideal client for somebody like me. And as far as finding me, you can go to revkey.com. That's REVKEY.com/podcast. You can actually see some of the other podcasts I've been on. And, much like we were talking about earlier, go ahead and fill out that scheduler, and you can schedule with me or my vice president, Kate Weiss, and we can kind of talk about your practice and what your particular Google Ads needs are, and go from there.
Fabulous. One final question, because when you talk about your ideal client, and I totally get and understand that, what about a doc who's just getting out of school, opening their own practice for the first time? They don't have traffic coming in. Are you the guy, or they should probably look elsewhere until they get rolling?
No, I think new businesses, are really particularly good for Google Ads as well, because you don't have, 500 people coming to your site organically in a month. And that can take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to really kind of get that going, depending on the competition in the area. So especially for a new practice, you can't really wait for that 6, 9, and 12 month period, you need clients now. And so that's where Google Ads comes in, where, you're going to be paying for those clicks, but you're going to be at the top of Google, and that can happen relatively quickly compared to, having to wait organically for all of those clicks to come in later.
That makes total sense. John, I can't thank you enough for taking the time, sharing your knowledge and wisdom. I have learned a ton, and really thank you so much for being a guest on the show. All right, and that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at fortheloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.